Yesterday, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates and announced that quantitative tightening will end in December. News that would normally be viewed as bullish for risk assets, but despite that, Bitcoin has dropped several $1,000s this week, blowing right through that CME gap. And before we dive in, I would like to hear your take. Do you think that these rate cuts will be bullish or bearish for Bitcoin long term? Drop your answer down in the comments right now. I'll be reading through them all and responding to them today. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the technical reasons behind this move on Bitcoin from 116,000 down to 108,000. What to watch as we head into the weekend as well. My name is Paul Sampson. Welcome back to DataDash. All right, folks, so we started this week off and I had pointed out how important this $114,000 level was to be, right? And we had just came down on that time frame. I think the last update was on Wednesday or Tuesday, and we were holding this on a daily outlook, okay? So looking back here, closed the daily above, closed that second daily above it, and this is where we started to lose it, all right? And I noted that from this region, as we were holding above, I was targeting a move towards that 120, and where things changed was at 114, right? So if we started to lose 114, we were going to be looking down. Now, what I've got here is a few key levels here. And again, a big one for really this month and this quarter is still going to remain at 114. Then we had two weekly levels that we need to be aware of, which was the weekly average of last week, right? So likely to be met this week, which we did pretty quickly as soon as we lost 114. At that point as well, I was looking for a move to our secondary weekly target, which is $108,000, which if you're in the Discord yesterday at 10:18, I had highlighted this route that we were likely to take, which was from around that 113 all the way down towards this $108,000 region. Now, why did we have such a move currently on Bitcoin, especially if we had relatively bullish news, right? When we see things like Fed cutting rates and things like quantitative tightening ending, usually you would think that that is a bullish reaction or a bullish news catalyst that would have a positive reaction on the market. All right. This is one of those times where the news just really doesn't matter, in my opinion, as far as short term. Okay. It's one of those things where I think everybody gets really wrapped up into those short term moves that occur around those higher time frame catalysts, which I think that in the long run will have a positive reaction as we continue here throughout the coming months. But right now, what we had was a very, very clear setup that I look for each and every single week. Now, I will admit that, again, I was looking to hold at 114 and looking to see if we'd actually push a little higher first, targeting that 120,000, which was about 3% from where we ended up hitting our head at, right? So 116.3, I was looking for the 120-ish, give or take, right? So about 3% difference there. But again, the big thing that I look to is not only just stating that, okay, well, I was looking for a 3% window and I missed it, right? It's also knowing when that's invalidated to some degree, and that was 114. So as soon as we lost 114, again, now the more midterm setup was at play. This is something that I look to each and every single week, which is the last week's range. All right, so this is last week's range that we had put in here based on volume. We obviously had the weekend rally that we started off at the high, and anytime you start off near your current high or your low even, there's always this setup where you sweep the high and die is what I call it, or you sweep the low and go. And what this is we come up and we break that high right here. You come back below that high. That essentially gives you your entry for a short, or just be aware that this is a setup for a pullback. You can have a stop loss above the high if you'd like. But ultimately, as soon as we lost that 114, for me, that was a double confirmation that we were likely to run this range. And what that means is just rotating that last week's range. You could see that we obviously had put this in. It had not been revisited quite yet. We come down, we have our weekly targets here and here. That's why really I didn't have too much preference or really anything around that CME gap. Yes, I did think that we'd see a little bit more upside before we got the pullback here, but I will say that again, on FOMC dates specifically, I even went back and even on my X account, you can look back on several of the FOMC windows. We get this exact move where we're trading at the ultimate high or the low, and then you get this huge reversal that appears to be a huge reversal at the time. And all we've done, obviously, is only go back to where we were trading at last week. So it's not like we just gave up multiple months of gains or anything like that. But we do see this setup time and time again, very technical, taking the news out of the equation. Like I said, I look for this exact move every single week. So this week just happened to be no different. And at the time of recording, we just came down and officially rotated the range. So meaning we've come down from top to bottom. We've gotten a little bounce off of the low so far. When we do come up and we take the high like this, it's likely we actually come down and actually take out the low as well. So just kind of something to be aware of. And at this point, we're in a place where we just kind of have to let the dust settle here for Bitcoin. We're still pretty much, in this little downtrend here. So coming down, taking this low, even heading a little lower is possible. Ultimately, I still have my target area of that 97,800 where I imagine Bitcoin is making its way down to. All right. The only question is, are we going to just push back up again before coming back down? Right. We're in this window of time, folks, where the range is going to whip you around. Okay. Again, when we were coming into that $130,000 area, which it missed it by $4,000, a few percent again, right? But the timing on that, and then just being aware that we were in that realm of price and time, allows me to just kind of notate that I anticipated to see a Bitcoin range out of that region. So from 120 down to, or 126 down to that 98,000, I anticipate Bitcoin range in this region probably for the next several weeks to months. That exact setup I just showed you, where we see this previous week range here, and you come up and you take your high and then you rotate. And if we continue down for the rest of this week, and mind you, now we're coming into the end of a month, we are going to have a new range, more than likely all the way back up here with volume targets and weekly targets and monthly targets all the way back in the 113 to 115. So likely that next week we do the exact same thing back to the opposite. And that is how these ranges just continue to form. For now, exactly where we're at a support level. We can't get overly bearish here at support, but just have to be aware that this is a place where we could still push down towards that 106,000, which is last week's low, and just kind of flirt around this region here, see how we finish up the week. Tomorrow's Friday. And more importantly here, it's actually the end of October. So just as you're seeing me look at some of these weekly ranges, we're going to have some new monthly data that's going to be populating basically at the end of tomorrow. And again, as we walk into next week, it's going to be essentially a new month, especially for stock market and everything like that. So when we end a week and when we end a month with the small pullbacks like this, or even just a pullback in general, usually that sets us up for a reversal on the next week or the opening of the next session, right? So next week, likely to have some pops back up to the upside, right? So now again, just really kind of zooming out here, really we're nowhere we haven't already been, right? We've just been trading in this region. And again, I really do anticipate we range around in this whole area for the next several weeks. All right, so that means we could get another push back up again and to take out these highs yet again, just to roll back over. Personally, until we really come down and meet this area, and it doesn't have to happen by any means, folks, but this is just the big one for me, and until we come down to that level, I'm not overly worried if we go any lower here and get bounces, or go higher here and then get a pullback. It's literally just a huge range that we've seen this entire bull market. All right, I highlight this time and time again, that just when we got the overall high right here, you get a little bit of a range sideways and down. You get this high over here, you get a little bit of a range sideways and down. And then even if we take this all the way back into 2023, I mean, you've got the range right here. Looking back at it, it looks not that crazy, but this was a sideways, relatively down at this point right here. But it's just a consolidation zone, all right? And until we lose $97,000, I'm not overly concerned with it, and that's remained my area that we're likely to come down to at some point. And in the meantime, you're going to get all these bounces and drops along the way, right? Ethereum had the same exact setup as Bitcoin. Get this big burst right at the end of the week on a Sunday. You take the high right here. As soon as we start closing back below that, we enter that setup that takes us down to where our weekly pivot, that's last week's average, likely to be met. Came right through it, lost it, back test, and at that point we're looking to rotate the range the same way, right? So for ETH, same thing. Both ETH and Bitcoin just rotated last week's range at the exact same moment, which again we do tend to see around this Wednesday, Thursday, midpoint of the week. So now we just got to see how we're going to do right here. We're at some areas of support, need Bitcoin to kind of find some footing, and ultimately on a higher time frame here, as long as we're holding above this region right there for ETH, nothing really changes here as well, right? So still looking for another push to the upside. Things change if we start to lose this region here, especially that yearly open. But otherwise, we've come back. We've retested a big area of support. We're consolidating currently. Nothing's really changed there. We're just getting those smaller movements in between while we're waiting on the larger play. S&P 500 had a small pullback yesterday. Really nothing too crazy, a 1% move. While yes, in a market that large, it's a little scary. But even just can barely even zoom this in any better here, right? To where it's just, you could see how we've just had nothing but upside here, normal pullbacks along the way. We've had some earnings reports yesterday, and a lot of times that brings on volatility as well. Nasdaq, after making day after day all-time highs, has got the small pullback, getting a little bounce actually right now while we're looking at it. And Dow Jones just about back up to the all-time high there as well. Now gold came back to this $3,900 spot, right? Did want to just highlight this because I think it's interesting. Huge move to the upside. Everyone's very fearful on a pullback. That's just the emotional side of it always. But we came back to what I was looking for and what I want to see, right? Because you don't want to just keep continuing straight up. You want to give some people some areas to get a DCA, a buy the dip opportunity. But we had nothing but basically straight up right here, and we've come down now and we've gotten to that 0.382. All right, so this is the area I look to each and every time we have a really strong impulse move to seek out that continuation. Not a guarantee by any means, of course, but this is an area that if we're living above, I see that as a next move up here for gold. And with that being said, it was a perfect little drop here, dropped down to 38.93, so nicely right below that $4,000 psychological level. It was a really decent drop, about 10%, right? 11% even, which is incredibly huge for gold, and especially at this market cap now, so nice and fearful at that point. Again, there's no guarantee we have to go straight up from here. I'm still looking for the reaction around this region. Want to hold above this 39.76, and if that is the case, then we can look up towards our next moves here now that I can actually pull because of our recent pull back, right? So now we have some new areas to look to. This is obviously price discovery, so there's no real resistance here based on previous information. This is just where the price action is likely to seek out to above us, okay? So potentially $4,600 up to $5,000 in gold. And remember what I said, it better not beat Ethereum to $5,000, folks. So even with the rate cuts and the Fed signaling the end of QT, it's clear that the market's still trying to make sense of how this new environment fits into the bigger cycle. Bitcoin's reaction this week shows us that even when news looks bullish, liquidity, positioning, and technical structure still rule the short-term moves. Stay patient out there, folks. Stay disciplined. Keep watching the key levels. These are the moments where conviction and understanding make the biggest difference. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll see you all in the next update. Until then, everybody, cheers.